always joked to people about it that growing up in the East Coast, queer was something that really was so minor, like it wasn't like a widespread thing. And I used to say, gay people, there's 10 of them, they all live in Toronto, because it has to be a metropolitan thing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Queerpreneurs Unleashed. I'm your host, Dustyn Baulkham. My pronouns are he, him, and I am currently based on the traditional ancestral territory of the Okanagan Silk people, also known as Kelowna. And we're back from a very lengthy delay after a busy summer of Pride festivals, but I'm really excited to welcome Kenney here all the way from the East Coast of Canada. We're going from coast to coast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. So please tell us a bit about the Q reviews.
That is a lengthy story, and I'll try not to go off too long. So the Q Reviews is the social imprint for the Q LGBTQ Creative Network. And back in 2018, I spent 26 years in post-secondary education, working in student services, working with students and training them on different things and creating different events and different things for them. And when I knew I was leaving post-secondary, part of what I always did was music, and I've always been really heavily involved in music. One of the areas of my work was working with COCA, which is the Canadian Organization of Campus Activities. And a lot of what we did was teach students about how to find music or source entertainment for your campus, whether it lined up with a Pride or maybe Black History Month. So when I was leaving post-secondary, I want to stay still working connected to the arts in some kind of way. And I started thinking about the fact that all my time in the music industry and working with different artists, I never really saw queer artists that much. And I really should know more about my own community of artists. And I'm such a music fan. So I was just like, why am I not seeing that much of them? So I started combing through and what was out there in the digital world. And lo and behold, I found this whole sea of artists that were out there, but they just didn't have a vehicle, or no one was giving them a chance to be seen or heard. So it gave me the motivation to get out there and start creating some things. That turned into a podcast, which turned into a radio show, which turned into a video series, which turned into an entire nonprofit platform and music charts and doing blogs and doing interviews. And it just became this kind of rolling system where, in the music side of it, probably about 12,000 artists in that I've had contact with or helped in some kind of way. And then branching out into visual arts, working with filmmakers, and just recognizing the fact that when we talk about representation, it is really strangleheld, even in the arts, like the art sector. There is not a lot of platforms that concentrate specifically on queer identity in the arts. And I think that's really important, especially as an educator myself, looking at like our youth and looking at our communities out there who don't necessarily have access or know how to access the queer world of art, is giving it a chance to be put in front of them so that they can become fans, but also to raise the awareness, the imprint, and the music, the art that is being created by our queer community.
Yeah, and being a festival promoter and whatnot, I've gone through that experience of trying to find queer artists. And while some are very vocal, there's so many out there, especially that maybe aren't as vocal, but maybe aren't identify as gay or lesbian or something that's sometimes maybe a bit more obvious, whether it's bi, pan. And so there's so many out there that we just have no idea. And you touched on talking about people's identity, but we didn't touch on yours. Yeah, I just got right into business. I'm like, I always say, let's start with you first. And then I led us in a different direction. So let's talk a bit about you first, your identity and how you define that.
I am cis male, he, him. I'm pretty vanilla that way in the sense that guy. I am that guy. But a lot of what I did in post-secondary was learning about other people's identities and really how to communicate that and help other people understand it. So I'm always aware that I'm that person, that the typical gay guy, I guess, is what I am.
And how old were you when you discovered it, when you came out?
Well, I am a little bit older than maybe I appear sometimes. And back in the day, I always joked to people about it that growing up in the East Coast, gay was something, or queer was something that really was so minor, like it wasn't like a widespread thing. And I used to say, gay people, there's 10 of them, they all live in Toronto, because it has to be a metropolitan thing, it can't be necessarily a small rural thing.
Yeah.
And as you grow and you realize, I used to equate it as crushes. That I wanted to be like that guy and I wanted to be as
Yeah.
cool as that guy. But really deep down, it was like I really liked that guy. And I didn't know it. And it was quite young for me that I used to feel that. But it wasn't until university that I really made the connection. When I finally left home and I went, and I felt like I was open to a lot of things, but it wasn't until I started actually having gay friends. And other friends would be like, didn't you know they were gay? And I was, why would I know that they were gay? They're like, couldn't you tell? And I was like, just because of how they were. I'm like, people are always going on about that. Why would I assume that? And they're like, then it started to connect with me and click. And I was like, yes, I've been in a very, even though I thought I was like broadly thinking, I had a very narrow understanding of things. And ever
Right.
since that point in time, I've always been incredibly fascinated and wanted to know more about anyone and everyone and how they live and who they are as people, because I think that is such a dangerous thing to allow yourself to be in that narrow scope, because there's so many cool things about people out there that you should just allow yourself to just experience it and know it.
Yeah, I agree. And I find that dating and going out into that world, I really want to understand a person because there's things that are really fascinating. There's things that are frustrating. And you're like, I just want to understand because for me, I don't know, understanding is key. And I think that's also a bit of the event producer in me of scoping out everything that's going on and then pulling it together so that we're all in a safe, accepting place. So
I
I
was so
think,
annoyed with myself the first time I went to like a gay bar, an actual gay bar, which I knew was a gay bar, because apparently I think I'd been in them before, but it wasn't necessarily known that way. And I was so annoyed with myself because I had this image, I think, of what I thought it was going to be like on the inside. And then I was finding people who were just like some of my guy friends at home, work boots, trucker cap. Here I am. I'm just like the local yokel. And I was like mind blown. And I was like, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe that I allowed myself to be so narrow minded when I'm always trying to profess this, we should be think about cool things and everybody's cool and that kind of thing. And then I had this narrow scope even for myself. I was so annoyed with myself.
yeah. On that, talking about yourself there, I like to ask this question of people. What is something unique about you that people may not know?
That's a really good question. I think that something that's unique about me is that there are more music lyrics in my head than there actually are just general thoughts and words. I tend to think in music, it's very, very weird. Music is like in every part of what I do. I write to music, I work to music, I drive to music, and I really do think in terms of just how music is formulated. And somebody said to me once that it's if you were to turn off like the music that was around me, would I be able to function? And I was like, for short periods of time, maybe, but I think I need it as an energizing kind of thing. And I think that most people who know me really well that would be maybe one of the first things that they would go to. But I think beyond that, I think it's almost an obsession to know more and more different types of music. I
Okay.
think, and I wish that was more exciting as a unique thing about me. I really do. I'm like, is there something odd about me that I can bring out? And I'm sure that there is, and other people probably know it too. But I'm like, what can I say?
If there's something that pops into your mind later during this, I'm happy to jump back to it. But
Awesome. My
I
grandfather is one of the most famous folk song singers
okay.
in from Canada, especially from the East Coast. But in Canada, he's passed now, and he actually is the one that introduced me to music. And I used to go and I would get on stage with him, and he would sing the songs. I had no idea what because it was folk songs, but I would get up there and tap the toe and be there with him. But it was
Yeah.
something that he introduced me to, and I had no idea at the time until later on that he was as famous and as popular and as important in folk song music as he was.
Right. Cool. So music runs in the blood.
Sure does.
I love it. I know you touched on this a bit at the beginning, but Do you mind sort of silencing that? Is that your
Yeah,
phone
I
going
don't
off? Yeah.
know where that came from. I don't know
No.
what that was. Sorry.
That's okay. I just sorry, the tone just completely threw me off. Okay, let me give me a sec here. Actually, there's one other personal one that'll lead us into business. So, with your personal identity, how does that work with it with your professional persona? Because I know you've got a couple hats. There's obviously the Q views and that, but you also have some hats outside of that that you wear as well.
I think what it is for me is that in thinking about music and just the arts in general, has always been a vehicle for me. I'm a big film fan and I love sci-fi. I don't know how many times I saw Star Wars, the original, in the theater, but I know that every day, matinee and maybe twice a day, I was watching that movie throughout the summer that it was released. And I think I've always found, something about life and something about that's interesting about life and about people through a lot of the things that I'm connected with, whether that's music or whether that's film, or in a lot of times, I'm a huge nerd. I'm a big comic book fan, right? So the X-Men to me was like massive when I was a kid and still is to this very day. But I always saw the, I guess, the human interest story throughout all of the pieces of art that I've always been connected to. And that actually framed a lot of how I approach things. I've never been interested in being this business mogul or whatnot. I've always had such an enjoy, even though it pains me at times around funding, but I've
Yeah.
always been in that nonprofit world, that nonprofit and charity world where I can see so much good that can be done for others. And I also see just how much people struggle in other areas of life and as different types of people and in marginalized communities. So for me, as somebody who has not had to struggle the same way that other people have, I recognize that. And all of these pieces of art have always taught me about looking at things differently and really trying to extend yourself so that you're doing more for others and you're creating something that actually can help others. So I really take a lot of what is put into art and a lot into music and the stories that I've read and really apply that just to regular life, but also to my work life. There's no shortage of help that's needed out there. And if you listen to some of that stuff that and the art, the music, whatever, it can change your perspective on things.
Yeah, it's true. With starting up the Q network and Q views and everything, what were some of your biggest challenges?
A lot. First of all, it's getting over the fact, okay, you know what? The fact that we're doing this, once upon a time, I would never have thought of doing this because I've had to look at myself and I'm like, oh God, nobody wants to do that. So getting into a podcast and hearing your voice and then trying to edit it, you're doing it all yourself, is a big kind of chunk of land to get over because
It is.
no, I don't know. Some people may like it, but I certainly don't. I've gotten used to it now. I can look at myself, I can hear myself, all of that kind of thing, and it doesn't really bother me because I've left it now. So that was one piece, but really it was about understanding who is out there and how to reach them. You think that, and now I will say, this is what, 6 years later, 6, 7 years later that I
Wow.
started doing this. It's much easier to find people because COVID sat everyone at home and everybody was online and it made it a little bit easier during COVID. But pre COVID, it was like, how do you knock on these virtual doors without looking like a weirdo? And how do you find the folks and you're cold calling them essentially and saying, hey, I don't know if you would be interested, but I'd like to help you in a way and talk to you and learn your story without sounding like a creeper. So that was a challenge in itself. When I started getting a lot of response, and even to this day, it's still a challenge, how to manage all of it as a kind of a solo entity without over promising and under delivering and not blowing smoke up someone's ass and really just trying to put yourself out there and help in whatever possible way. It's an industry, especially with the arts, whether it's music or film or anything like that, there's an industry that's attached to it. And the artists there's a lot of mistrust that's there. So you have to really think about that when you're approaching this and you're talking to people because they may be trying to be sold on any number of things at any point in time. And what all
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to do is like, how can I help? Which sounds great in theory, but in an individual, like an industry practice, sounds completely like BS. So you really have to be able to back it up and
Yeah.
come through for people. I've been very fortunate, I think, that I started early and
Right.
I've been able to cultivate some really good relationships and do some very, very cool things. But also at the same time, being very aware of just how much, especially in certain communities, there's a lot of mistrust. So you have to be able to back it up and you have to get in there and really show that you're in their corner. But that is a challenge. The people part of it is a challenge
Right.
because everybody's so different and everybody needs very different things. So that's been a challenge. And of
Yeah.
course, as it is when you're a nonprofit or you're doing anything like this, funding, money
Always.
is
Yeah.
always a challenge because you have big ideas,
Yep.
but little pot. So you have to figure it all out. And
Yeah.
collaborations have been very helpful in
Yeah.
that kind of respect.
And to your earlier point about not sounding like a creeper, it's also because all of us, we get messages every friggin' day, whether it's Facebook, email, all the different social medias being like, I can help, I can help. And everyone wants money. So when you're coming at it from a place of this doesn't cost you anything, it definitely, I think, opens up the door a bit, but there's just sometimes gets lost in that flood of spam and trash that's out there.
And I also think too that because the expectation is there that somebody's trying to sell you on something, whenever it comes across as free, it can go a couple of different ways. It can feel like, oh my God, this is awesome, but what's the catch? Right?
Yeah.
What is that? Or because it's free, because you're not really trying to sell them on anything, sometimes artists can be like, maybe this isn't a very valuable thing that I really want to spend my time with this or in this world? Should I maybe trying to focus my energies over here because
Right.
that could be a better return for me because
Right.
they are thinking about it from a business
Of
acumen as
course.
well.
Yeah. You
So
bet.
that's a challenge there. Free can be great, but
Yeah.
it
Sometimes
comes
you get
with
to
some
pay for
hang
it.
ups too.
During your entrepreneurial journey, have you experienced any discrimination or biases that you've encountered? And if you have, what how have you navigated them?
So I was very fortunate to be doing this and never really get any kind of any attacks online. I think I was because I've never sank any money into promotion, marketing. The shadow ban, I feel like Instagram and Facebook hate me because I am that person that's posting, trying to interact or whatnot, but I'm not going to give you any money. I'm not going to put any money into your pocket for this because there's very little that's there. And if I'm going to
Right.
channel it somewhere, I'm going to channel into something that's going to be useful. But what has happened recently, and I said that you must be doing something right when suddenly the trolls find you and they come a knocking. And lately they've been knocking hard. So I've been getting lately a lot of online kind of anything from this is I don't want to be too alarming, but it's pretty nasty stuff. The whole "you're going to hell" type thing, that you should be put away, that you should this is disgusting, blah 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 blah. I never saw that at the beginning, and I think
Okay.
because I was in a very maybe in a very specific community that wasn't going outside of that. Somehow it has gone outside, and I think that's because I'm doing a lot more and I'm interacting with other different kinds of organizations and platforms. And then suddenly, boom, the trolls, some of which are definitely bots, and some of which are people who this is just what they do and what they get off on. So for the most part, you know what? Let's just pack it up, shove it away. Nobody needs
Right.
to see that. It doesn't bother me because I
Yeah.
know that it's probably not coming from anybody that I'm ever going to meet. And if I do, they probably are not going to say anything because they're not behind a keyboard.
The keyboard warriors.
What I've seen some of, which is disheartening, is within some kind of discrimination within the community. And that is challenging sometimes. I am here for everyone. And if you're somebody that wants the T lopped off of LGBT, I'm like, that's not for me. I'm not
Right.
going to get into a collaboration with you. I can't
Right.
stop your thought. I can only do whatever, but I'm here for everyone. And that's a bit discouraging when you have somebody who comes to you. And if you're promoting a trans artist or a film about gender dysphoria, and somebody shows up on your doorstep and is trying to sell you on why their view of why things should be changed is happening, I'm like, I got no time for that.
Yeah.
I'm not buying into that. And it's just, it becomes disheartening when you see that, because there's already so much discrimination and prejudice that's out there. We shouldn't be attacking and cannibalizing ourselves from the inside.
Agreed. And we've experienced a lot of that hate that you were talking about earlier, more around drag, but it was back in kind of May, June when we were producing the Kelowna's Next Drag Superstar. And I'll make a long story short on this, but we were getting so many comments and interactions on Facebook. I actually let it go. And I'm glad I did, because about a year and a half ago, I got blocked on Facebook from doing any advertising, and I didn't know it at the time, but apparently Facebook doesn't like BC driver's license, because with all this interaction that was going on, they're like, oh, because your community is so engaged with your content, you're eligible to earn income off of this. I'm like, oh, if I can make money off all the hate, then let's make money off the hate. So then, but they had to verify who I was. So I submitted my driver's license twice, and it kept saying denied. And I was like, what the fuck? And while I was in Mexico, I was checking in, because I was working an event down there, and checking in for my flight. I was like, oh, I got to pull my passport. I'm like, let me try my passport. So I scanned it, and 2 hours later, I was approved. And all the locks that had been placed on me from Facebook were released. And I had full access to advertising and I'm like, seriously? I just had to submit a friggin' passport photo to get access? I'm like, this is ridiculous. But so at the same time, I was glad for haters, but we've had protesters at events, you name it, we've had it. And some of them are starting to get a bit aggressive, but yeah, so I know that feeling well.
It's really unnerving when you think about what it is that you're doing and who it is that you're helping, and it
Right.
really has nothing to do with anyone else. There's no reason for them to even be interested. It's not even their world, but yet
Yeah.
they take it upon themselves to insert themselves into your world. And it's, what are you getting out of this? What are you really getting out of this? Other than the fact that you're using your time. And a lot of times they show up, and the other side, the queer side, is 10 times more the amount of people and louder, and is approaching things in a very much more, productive and positive manner. So it's like, why do you choose to go this route? Why is it that you invest part of your life into hate? It makes no sense to me, but
Yeah.
if the world made sense, we wouldn't be having an American election the way it is right now. So
Yeah. I don't think the Canadian one next year or whenever it happens will be too much different. Maybe not quite as aggressive, but it's starting to make its way north. But
it is.
so you made a comment about you don't do any advertising, and so I'm curious how you approach marketing and how you reach out to LGBT audiences.
I do everything organically. I post, I engage, I comment. I do a lot, especially on Instagram. I do a lot of DMing and just messaging people. When I first started, I would send voicemails. I'm like, people can read anything, but I would send like a voice memo by Instagram when I saw somebody that was doing something really cool. And if they heard a song and I was like, wow, this is a great tune, and nobody's hearing it, nobody even knows it exists. I'm like, I can imagine how lonely that is for an artist. And I would just send them just a voice memo saying, hey, I just want you to know this is what I do. I just really what you have put out. I want you to keep going. I hope that you're doing well. A little message like that.
Nice.
And I would get messages back. And it just started connecting. And I think that I got to a point where I wasn't worried about having 50,000 followers if 50,000 followers was 1,000 actual good people that were interested and 49,000 crap. I'm like, what is the point? Numbers mean nothing other than if you're going to do some sponsorship and stuff like that, they don't want you unless you're at a certain level. Too bad. So I just started really making connections with other organizations and other platforms, whether that be music magazines or other radio shows, and just connecting. Just recently, I was on TikTok, which I still, to this day, I am not good with. I don't know how to use it. I don't really want to know how to use it, but I figured I'd put something out every now and then.
Yeah.
But I'm on there, and I meet a gentleman who's running an LGBTQ film festival, a virtual one, out of Los Angeles. And we just started connecting. We had such a great conversation, and I'm now helping him out, and we're doing Q&As with those artists and helping get those filmmakers, advance them into the community so more people within the community know who they are and check out their work. And little things like that can go a long way. I found myself in a Q&A with the co-founder of the Trevor Project, in my opinion, I can't believe I'm here talking to you. Let's talk about the film, but let's talk about you because you've done so much.
Totally.
And it's just such a really cool way to go about marketing and promotions if you take off the need to grow bigger
Right.
and you just allow it to happen. I'm okay with that. It will grow on its own. And if I can, by the time I retire, look back and be like, all right, this platform is here and it's doing all of these things and it's now taking care of itself. People are being serviced. People know more about it. Then I've done something. So I really approach it from an organic kind of standpoint.
Okay.
I do as much in person locally as I can. I'm hopefully, knock on wood, going to start doing maybe some virtual kind of, invite people in, have like little round tables, that kind of stuff to introduce what it is that I'm doing to more and different platforms and just see how that will go and really not worry so much about the sponsored by or suggested for you because that becomes white noise.
Yeah.
And it really, to me, I think is counterproductive to the kind of relationships I'm trying to build. So I just don't do it. I just don't put any money into it. And we'll see how far it takes me.
Yeah. I'm jumping ahead to a question because it relates to your question or your comment around retiring. I always like to know what are Queerpreneurs' vision for the legacy they want to leave with their business.
It's a good question. It's a hard question. There's a bit of a pie in the sky answer for it. I know for me, my legacy that I want to leave is that if there's anything that I can do is make sure, especially youth, never feel like they can't see themselves or hear themselves reflected in the art that's being created. I want them to feel I didn't have that growing up. Had there been a swashbuckling Luke Skywalker who was queer AF in Star Wars, that may have opened up some eyes to me earlier. I may have recognized things, but that just wasn't the case. Same thing with music. You didn't even hear same-sex pronouns in music until recently. And even now, it takes an artist of a certain caliber to be able to feel confident enough to release that.
Right.
But I want community members to be able to feel, and especially youth, that they can see and hear themselves in there and know who these artists are. So if I retire and I kick the bucket and I leave this mortal coil, and I know that people know more and are invested more in their own community than they were before through arts, then I'm going to feel like I've done something.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I've had a few encounters, but the most important one that I ever had was a woman from the Ukraine. This is pre-war, and I hope she is okay. But she sent me an email and she said, I stay up till 4:00 in the morning every Thursday to listen to your show because I enjoy it. I love the music. And it's the one thing that I don't have to worry about looking for or trying to find because there's nothing around me that really speaks to the queer identity because I'm in the Ukraine. And I listen to it and I learn so much about the music. And then I go listen to the playlist and I find out other artists. And I'm like, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
If you're making a difference and helping somebody in that kind of way, then you're doing something good. It doesn't have to be this big monumental, let's throw a world party kind of thing. It may be about making those individual differences. And that, to me, if I can leave and look back and say, I'm doing some of that, then I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We have those moments when that one person just gives you that really genuine comment about how it's impacted you. And that's why I started doing this in the first place. Because sometimes we get lost in our journey, right?
It means the world when you are fighting, right? We work during the day. We do things off the sides of our desk. You're trying to get things done. I got to edit that podcast. And, I really want to make sure that gets out. And then you've got other voices going, but really, who's affected if it doesn't get out as fast as you want it to? That's not the point. The point is you want to get it done because you want to be and get it out there for people. But there needs to be more money. There needs to be more opportunities. We need to be able to do this, do that. And you get frustrated by a lot of things. And then you have something like that comes along and cuts through all of that and slows you down and goes, you know what? There's frustration, but you're doing something that is impacting somebody, and that in turn just brings it all into focus.
Yeah. An earlier comment you made about same-sex pronouns in music, it made me think, could you imagine if Ricky Martin had said he bangs versus... Because I was in love with it, because you also talked about idolizing people earlier before you realized what you were, and that he was one of those ones that I idolized when I was young. I'm just like,
So I was an REM fan, and it had no clue. And then thinking back, I go back and listen to old REM now with a completely different lens, right? I listened to it with new ears because you just didn't know. And they couldn't come out. They couldn't be honest about what it was that they were talking. And there's hidden messages in so many little different things. And whether or not they meant them to be there, they were writing music. And that to me is really, it's like listening to a new album. Like Automatic for the People by REM is one of my favorite albums of all time. But I listen to that very differently now and imagine who Michael Stipe may have been writing about, what he may have been writing about, what his experiences were. And that to me is just having it being a fan all over again.
Do you find that there's any unique challenges to being a queer business owner that might need more attention or advocacy?
I do. I think that there's the real world, and then there's the world that everybody wants you to believe exists. I think the world that everybody wants you to believe exists is that there's room for everyone and there's all these different opportunities. But really, when you break it down, it is a challenge because you're trying to, I'll put it this way, just because, and I'll use the arts and I'll use the Q review as a really good example, just because it's art created by queer artists doesn't mean it's only for queer artists. It's for everyone. And if you're not a queer receiver, if you're not somebody who's queer and you're working with this art and you're listening to this art or you're watching these films, it doesn't mean that it's not for you. It just means that, like the rest of us, we had to watch stories that weren't written from our lens, but didn't make the stories any less good or the movie any less bad or good. It just meant that it was from a different lens, and we received it and we were okay with that. So I think as a queer, entrepreneur, we also have to realize that sometimes we become very engaged with our community because we want our community to support us. But the rest of the world also needs to know that it's for them too. And that can be anything. If you're doing something very queer, like queer travel, and you're creating travel plans for queer couples or individuals who are making sure that they're going to certain safe spots and stuff like that, that does make sense. But if you are a queer baker and you are doing your baking, you've got a whole kind of catering kind of business, just because you're identifying as queer because you're proud of it, doesn't mean that the rest of the world can't come and buy. Some of them won't, because we know.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a push and pull there where I think from the entrepreneurial standpoint and from the business side of things, we have to get better as, I guess, consumers too, of recognizing that these walls aren't necessarily there. We're creating barriers where barriers don't need to be there. And I think that some of that, from an advocacy standpoint, from like our business associations, also needs to be in there. Recently talking to the CGLCC about the Rainbow Registered program, and so many people that I've talked to went, isn't that just for queer businesses? It's, you're misunderstanding things. Yes, we should have our own practices in order for sure. But this is about making sure that other businesses understand what the queer identity is and what the needs are. So I think that there's a little bit of work that needs to be done there to get things to filter into the general business community a little bit more. And of course, funding. It would be nice if there was more funding for queer projects and queer businesses specifically.
Yeah.
And I think that it's getting there. It's getting better, but there's always a need for more.
Oh, of course. As you point on the CGLCC Rainbow Register, I always joke it's for the straight businesses to show that they're welcoming to us. And everything I do, 99% of what I do is queer focus. I don't need to show that I'm welcoming to the queer community. I've looked at the supplier diversity and it's some of the levels of hoops got jumped through. I'm just like, whatever. I'm not in a fuss to get it.
I think something that happens in this, we'll call it a discussion. I had this discussion recently about queer music and
Yeah.
how somebody was saying it was segregating. And I'm like, no, I'm like, we're not saying that there's no place for non-queer music in the world. What we're saying is I'm putting and shining a light on these artists who happen to identify as queer
Yeah.
so that they have a place to be seen and heard. So because they are marginalized in so many different places,
Mm-hmm.
and so that they can actually feel proud amongst their peers who are queer. I'm like, that is what it's about. But some folks really want to attack and be like, it's like the rainbow flag versus the straight flag. It's no, you already have that.
Yeah,
What we're trying to do is give space for those who don't actually have it.
exactly. Yeah. Along your journey, have you had times when you wanted to just give up and say screw it? And if so, how did you pull through?
I do. I have it all the time. And
Yeah.
it's not that I don't like what I do, it's about me finding balance. Balance is really challenging. You don't want to give up on things, but you also have to realize you're one person, that you have a life, and your life can't be just working.
Yeah.
And when you lose track of the balance, a lot of times is when I think you start to feel the heaviness of it, and where it's other people just get up, they go to work, they come home, and that's it, and then they have their life. Why are you doing this to yourself? But I think it speaks to a passion that's in me. But
Absolutely.
when the balance starts to get out of flux, which it tends to do regularly for me because I am a human make work project, I can't turn off the brain. There's always, and I don't say no, and I need to know how to say no a little bit more, or say, this sounds great, and not at this exact time,
Right.
maybe in 2 months' time. That's okay to say, but I always see so much potential, so I can allow myself to become too overwhelmed and inundated with things. And then I get into like a corner and I get myself backed into a corner. So in those times, I really have to think about what is happening, what is causing it, and what are the things maybe I can let go of that aren't as crucial to lower some of the heaviness that's on me so that I don't end up hating what I'm doing. I have to figure my way through that quite a bit and talk myself through it. And a lot of times it's just sitting down and looking at everything that I'm doing and what my output is and saying, you know what, you're really, I'll use social media as an example. I tend to use social media as a way to support artists by, I don't put myself out there, I put their music out there,
Right.
or I'll put out whatever it is that they're posting, I'll share it to stories, and I'll spend a lot of time doing that, and I'll get in myself into a cycle, and at some point I have to stop. You know what, maybe you need to slow down on that, because you're getting yourself into a pattern and you're just constantly doing it, and it's making it seem like you don't have any time for other things, but it's because you're not bothering to go do other things that you really want to do, that you need to do, go to the gym, go for a walk, get outside, that those things that you're doing are not going to, they're not as consequential to what it is, what your plan is and what your work is.
Right.
You're just getting yourself into a habit. So you have to check yourself along the way, but it's
Absolutely.
challenging.
It is.
And again, sometimes you look at this and you say, am I making an impact? And is this really happening? Oh my God, does anybody give a rat's ass about what it is that I'm trying to do? Then you have to check yourself too, and you have to think
Yeah.
back about those emails that you get and those comments that you get. When somebody sends you just a little note saying, I just want you to know I truly appreciate what it is that you've done and what you're doing for the whole
Right.
community. And I take those and I sit with that for a while, and that changes kind of what's happening internally for me.
Love it. Yeah, we need to reflect and remind ourselves of that. That's for sure. I
Got to
think we
do
all
it,
we,
man. You
we
got to
all have
do
those
it.
little spirals, and it's okay. I got to get out of this because
Well,
we don't have a boss to smack us around a bit. We have to do it ourselves.
and I think too, when you're a creator, even like yourself, and you're working on events and stuff like that, you know the benefit that somebody gets out of it, and it
Yeah.
drives you. It's almost an addiction to help make other people feel good and give them a sense of belonging, and having a good time and doing something great for them. You feed off that, and that is a bit of a facade, because you eventually crash because they go home or they go on with their lives, but you're still into it mentally, and you have to find ways to remove yourself from it a bit and
Totally.
put things in perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to move us into what I call my lightning round. So it's not meant to think about it. It's just you choose A or B, and then we go to the next question. So no explanation, nothing else, just A or B. So dinner at a fancy restaurant or a home cooked meal?
Home cooked meal.
Multiple short vacations or one long vacation a year?
Multiple short.
Agreed. Mexico or Hawaii?
Oh, I've been to both. I love both. I'm gonna say Hawaii, but not
Perfect.
Maui, not
Okay, just
Oahu. I
Maui
want to go to
specific.
Maui
Okay,
next.
fair enough. If you're given the choice, would you watch a movie or enjoy live music?
Live music, live music.
I would be surprised if you answered otherwise. Spain or Portugal?
Portugal.
Toronto or Vancouver?
I've spent more time in Toronto, but I'm gonna say Vancouver. I
Yeah.
like heat.
Early riser or like to sleep in?
Sleep in.
If given the opportunity, would you drive somewhere or fly? If you had
Drive.
both options. Okay.
Drive.
Audiobooks or real books?
Real books.
Are you on the business side of things more of a debit or credit card user?
Debit.
Bank or credit union?
Bank.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but dog or cat?
Oh, cat.
As you can still see just in the corner of the frame there. Spotify or Apple Music?
Spotify, unfortunately, but that's just because of habit.
Are you a popcorn lover?
Yeah.
I find that's one of those ones that people love it or hate it. And same with this is my last one is does pineapple belong on pizza?
All the time, especially with jalapenos and prosciutto.
Jalapeno, prosciutto, yes. Pineapple. I have three little ones here. They're just short answers, like couple words. Favorite type of music?
Alt rock.
Okay. Favorite time of year?
Summer, but I want it to be longer.
Always. And your favorite place to travel for vacation?
Ah, that's a hard one. There's many that come to mind, but I'm going to say anywhere where there is a wine, like anywhere like a wine valley.
Okay. So here, Kelowna would be a good one. Kelowna,
Kelowna would
Napa,
be good. Napa Valley,
Spain.
like here in Nova Scotia, we've got Annapolis Valley with tons of vineyards. I
Okay.
love it.
There we
Wine, cheese, ciders, bring it.
go. That's amazing. All right, I have a couple kind of final questions to wrap things up here. I always like to talk about how people manage their kind of work-life balance and self-care as an entrepreneur. I know we touched a bit on this before, but
The balance for me, I think, comes in making time. I think that you have to recognize what you really enjoy and what is really important to you. And I think it's okay to acknowledge it. So for me, I am somebody who I love to dance. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get out to a nightclub and dance all the time because those days have gone. But there's ways to inject that into my life. I also enjoy being outdoors and being in water. And I have to have that. And I have to make time for things like that. And if you don't, you end up missing it and you want it in your life so badly. So it's so important to do that and say, what are those things? And everything's different for everybody. Sometimes a great long walk for me is something that just helps me clear my head and just put on some earbuds, away I go, get on a hiking trail and go. And I think that you have to be honest about what it is that you need as fuel. And in life, our fuel is going to look very differently. And it's not necessarily going to line up with everybody else, but you need to find ways to inject it into your life because if you don't have it, you will notice that it's missing. And that will really upend the balance quite a bit. I think sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on something being a big deal. We have to do this. I have to get out. I have to get somewhere. If you can do the little things that really actually feed your soul, and that's how I think about it, then that will carry you through till you get to those moments where you can do something a
right.
little bit bigger. But we don't do those big things all the time anyway. Not unless you can. And if you can,
Yeah.
good on you.
Yeah.
But most of us can't. So you have to find the nuggets that actually feed your soul and drop them in there on the regular. And that can be anything from cuddling with your cat to going out, hitting the golf course. I don't mind doing things by myself either. I've become quite understanding of the fact that I am very different than a lot of my friends and
Yeah.
what interests me. And I'll go and do those things if I need to have it. If I need to be at a live music, if I really want to see something, I will travel and I will jump in the car and go, because I need to have that. And I think it's okay to give yourself the room to have those, to get that fuel that you need for yourself.
Absolutely. I love it. Do you have
And
any
be
favorite?
honest
Oh,
about it. Be honest about it.
yeah, that's great. Do you have any favorite books or podcasts that have inspired you along the journey?
I am a big, so listen, I did an undergrad English degree and I
Okay.
read for, I think, 6 years. I did 2 degrees. And at the end of it, I was like, I will never read again. Now it's really important. I like funny kind of novels, that kind of thing. But more so recently, I've been reading a lot of just interesting things that people are writing about themselves. So that autobiography kind of thing, and just learning more about people. I have gone and become a lover of the documentary. And when something comes along that really grabs my eyes, recently on Netflix a few years ago, they had the Sun City one. Again, it's about music, about the studio in California that was being torn down and things like that. But I also will jump into a documentary and watch that, because I really enjoy, although I enjoy reading about somebody's life, I like to see it and hear it from their words. The Cyndi
Right.
Lauper one that was just recently out, the new Celine Dion one. Yeah, things like that. And reading wise, I'm more comic books. I'm going to read all of my weekly X-Men X books, like you name it, my Marvel, my DC, whatever else I get my hands on. That level of reading and fantasy takes me to a place that I love to go. It's just pure comfort to me. Whereas other things like a novel or whatnot can be a little lengthy for me, that I just only get into it and then I have to stop.
Yeah.
So I do things that are in shorter, when I'm actually reading in shorter spans.
Right. That's great. And last question I like to ask is, for any other 2S LGBT person that's considering an entrepreneurial journey, what advice would you give them?
I would say something that has helped me out a lot is not being afraid to make these kinds of connections. Dustyn, you and I have chatted before, and even though we're not chatting on the weekly, I know that I could come back to you and just be like, listen, I'm doing this kind of thing. Have you ever heard of this? I'm trying to figure my way through it. And I've
Absolutely.
made some really good connections that way. Don't think of people as competition. Think of people as being in the same soup with you. It's like an alphabet soup,
Yeah.
and we're all swimming around together. We can make a cool word together,
Absolutely.
and think about it that way. Don't
I love it.
fear about other people, and don't also, oh, something else, don't think that because you've gotten to a certain level or whatever, that it's something else is now too elementary for you.
Yeah.
I like to go back and reteach myself things, even though I have a lot of experience just in my own world and what it is I'm doing. I like to go, you know what? You don't know everything. Let's take a little free course on something. Let's get into a webinar that maybe you're going to pick up on some things, or that you'll just reignite a spark and make you think
Yeah.
about something. Don't ever stop learning. Don't. It's so important to keep feeding your brain and feeding your imagination by putting yourself in front of things that maybe you think you already know, but you could learn from by hearing from somebody else.
That's great advice. Thank you. I appreciate your time today and sharing your journey with us. I know our listeners and our viewers are going to love it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap things up?
Here's what I will say from my own perspective in terms of the arts and queer arts. Remember, you can be a fan of queer art just as much as you are of just regular art. Find a queer artist that really speaks to you. Maybe it's their music, maybe it's their words, maybe it's their visuals. Find one and really celebrate them, and then introduce them to your queer friends and also your straight friends. But make sure that you're cultivating that kind of queer fanship in there and supporting our community.
That was beautiful. That's going to make a great reel afterwards, too. A good promo.
Please, it's what I do.
Yeah, love it. Thanks again so much. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, we'll chat again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.